Hi there, I'm Vincent Boss and I provide dating and self-improvement advice. And in today's podcast, we're going to be discussing why an ex wants you when you move on. I provide audio coaching for breakup recovery, trying to get an ex back, attracting someone new, and life coaching. Visit www.dateme.tips for more details. Please check your spam and junk folders if you are expecting an email from me. So now let's get back into today's podcast, and today we are discussing why an ex wants you when you move on. So if you have been dumped and want to try to get your ex back, you have likely heard people say to you, as soon as you move on, your ex will want you back. But why is this? And is it true? In today's podcast, I'll be discussing 3 reasons why an ex wants you when you move on. So let's get straight into this. And point number 1 is moving on takes time. So before we get into the depths of point number 1, I just want to speak quickly about the terminology of moving on. I prefer to use the terminology of moving forward because when I think of moving on, I see that as closing the door behind you. And if you want to try to get your ex back, my advice to you would be to move forward rather than moving on, because I believe moving forward is where you leave that door open. Okay, you're focusing on your own journey, you're making new connections, you're living your life to the full, but that door is ajar. And this, I believe, is an important difference. Now, I appreciate not everybody uses the same terminology as I do, and therefore I will be speaking within this podcast by saying moving on. But the intricacies that I see there is a difference between moving on and moving forward. And if you want your ex back, you can't be closing and locking that door behind you. You need to be leaving it somewhat open for the possibility of your ex to one day reach out to you, and therefore I like to say moving forward. But you understand that I'm going to be saying moving on because this is what most people understand as the terminology. So moving on takes time. And what I mean by this is that if you've been dumped yesterday, you're not likely to want to move on today. You're not likely to want to move on tomorrow. You're not likely to want to move on in 6 months' time even. Now, this isn't a race, and everybody is different. So you can't judge your situation with your friends, your family, the person you speak to at work. It doesn't make an effect on what's going to happen with you and your journey during this time. Your path, your way forward is going to be unique. This isn't a race. It's not about trying to get through this as quick as possible. It's about trying to get through this in a safe and healthy way. Now, whether you get your ex back or whether you find somebody even better, I'm convinced that that is your destination. But how long it takes you to get to that point is not something that anybody can predict. But what we can say is that it takes time. It's not going to be days or weeks in most instances. It's more likely to be many, many months, if not moving into the years. Now, that's not something to scare you. You could be one of the lucky ones that gets to a more stable mindset very quickly, but you would be in the minority. So we're going to be focusing on the fact that moving on takes time. So when we're asking the question, why an ex wants you when you move on, the first thing to really understand is that this is taking time. So when we consider why an ex would want you, if and when you move on, this isn't going to be anytime soon. And time is absolutely crucial when we consider the answer to this question. If this was a mathematical equation, then time would be a very important factor within the algebra type equation that this would probably end up being. This isn't something which is easily explained, but if you just consider that time is a very important integer within the situation, you can see that when your ex wants you back, it's not going to be anytime soon. If people are saying, well, yes, your ex always wants you when you've moved on, what they're actually saying is your ex is likely to want you into the future. They're likely to want you further away. we're likely to want you at a point which is further than now. That's what we're actually trying to say to you. And it's important that you really distinguish this, because when people listen to, oh yeah, your ex always wants you when you move on, this can try and create a false position where you're thinking, okay, what does this mean? How do I get to that point? Should I pretend to move on? You can't fake the situation, because not only is faking moving on not really moving on, but also it's not going to involve the necessary time. So it'd be much better if people change their point of view and their perspective from saying your ex always wants you when you move on to saying in this first instance, your ex wants you in the future. Now, one of the main reasons why they don't want you instantaneously is because at the time of a breakup, your ex, the dumper, is feeling a very low level of romantic emotional attraction for you. This is an unfortunate truth. If they didn't feel a low level of attraction, they wouldn't have dumped you. Now, this isn't just connected to physical attraction. Romantic emotional attraction is everything combined. It's physical, mental, spiritual attraction. It's everything together, mixed into one. And if and when somebody feels a low level of this attraction, this is when they're likely to action a breakup. So during the time of the breakup and slightly beyond that point, your ex-dumper is unlikely to have been able to regrow the attraction necessary to want to reconnect with you. Your ex is only going to want to reconnect with you if and when the necessary high point of attraction has been reached. And this has to be regrown. And this takes time. So now let's get into point number 2 and the second point of today's podcast about why an ex wants you when you move on. And point number 2 is when time starts to tick by. So when time starts to tick by, which as we've already said is a very important metric to consider, then one of the things which is likely to coincide with this is you as a dumpee are tending to behave in a more attractive way. So again, this is really linked to time. When you were dumped, you're going to be in emotional turmoil. You're going to be feeling at your lowest ebb. You're not going to be feeling attractive, and you're not going to be acting attractive. You're quite likely to be acting in a needy and desperate way, which isn't attractive. You're unlikely to be looking after your health and your fitness as well as maybe you should be doing. And again, this isn't going to help you look, feel, or be attractive. So once more, we link this to time. And when we see time ticking by, you tend to behave in a more attractive way. And this is because you are naturally starting to go through breakup recovery. Now, as I said, this isn't something we're going to be able to set our watches to and say, okay, so this will be exactly 4 months down the line or whatever you may be considering. This is you and your own journey. This could be weeks, but it's most likely to be months. It might even be years. But you will start to get to a stage where your breakup recovery allows you to start behaving in a way which is a little bit more like you used to, and hopefully, even beyond that, to become version 2.0 of yourself. Hopefully by this point, whenever that arises, you will be eating healthier, you'll be exercising regularly, you'll be removing bad substances from your life, you'll be getting enough sleep, you'll be mixing with new people, you'll be improving your skill set, and so on and so on. You'll be doing things, behaving in a way, acting like, looking like, feeling like somebody who is more attractive. So again, well, let's go back to that very important main question of today's podcast. Why an ex wants you when you move on? So remember, point number 1 is moving on takes time. So we're already saying that time is moving by. Point number 2 is when time starts to tick by, we understand that you're more likely to be behaving in a better, more attractive way. Hopefully better than when you were actually in your relationship. Most dumpees actually live their life in a better way eventually post-breakup than they did pre-breakup. Because the trauma of a breakup pushes people, motivates people, gets people to reach for the stars, more so than if your life is ticking along just nicely. So trauma can sometimes be the fuel for you to become the best version of yourself you ever have been. Sometimes people actually say in hindsight, being dumped was the best thing possible for them because it allowed them as a person to grow and reach their full potential. Whether or not they got their ex back aside, people eventually, generally, start to feel better for it. It might not feel it right now, But trust me, you will get to that stage. Again, we can't set our watch to it. But it's important to realise that as time starts to tick by, you're more likely to start behaving in a more attractive way because the trauma, the pain, it doesn't necessarily go away completely, but as time moves forward, you will start to be able to live your life somewhat easier. It isn't a race, it's not going to happen anytime soon necessarily, but slowly but surely, you will get there. Grief takes time, going through the stages, understanding who you are as a person, recognising what you need to do. These tiny steps will start to add up, and maybe without realising, you'll be that more attractive person that I'm speaking about. But if you have been dumped a couple of months ago, it's not likely that you're there right now. And it's also not likely that you can even see the light at the end of a tunnel. But please keep going, because as long as you keep going, you will get to that light, you will come out the other side, and happiness will be there waiting for you. You must keep going, and this is connected to time. Some people say time heals all wounds. I wouldn't necessarily say your wounds will be completely healed, but we learn to live within our new normal. And our new normal can be exciting, it can certainly be fulfilling, and it can actually be something which eventually looks better than our prior memories of what we used to live our life by. Now, if you want advice and support on how to try and increase the chance of one day getting your ex back, then you may want to consider my audio coaching service, where me and you can speak one-on-one about your unique specific situation. Go to my website www.dateme.tips for more information about how I can become your coach and your teammate via my audio coaching service. So now let's get into point number 3 and my final point of today's podcast about why an ex wants you when you move on. And point number 3 is after so long. So after so long, your ex will reflect. And this is the final piece of the puzzle. Why does an ex want you when you move on? Well, the reality of the situation is that as time starts to tick by, not only will you be feeling like you can move on in regards to living your life in a healthier way, making new connections, doing your own thing, because you're processing your grief and you're moving forward, but it will combine with the fact that your ex will be reflecting. Your ex-dumper is not likely to reflect on the breakup a few days after they dumped you. They're not likely to reflect on the breakup a few weeks or even a few months after the breakup. From my research, the average amount of time that a dumper reflects is 6 months. But that isn't something that we can say for certain. Your ex might not reflect for a year. Your ex might not reflect for 2.5 months. The average, from what I can see, is around 6 months. But this is crucial, because if your ex doesn't reflect, your ex can't decide they made the wrong choice. So this is why it's so important to recognise why people say your ex will want you when you move on. It's not purely the concept of you moving on which makes your ex want you back. What actually is taking place is time is moving forward to the stage which you as a person who were dumped for certain reasons I can't predict are now living your life in a way where you're a version 2.0. Enough time has passed for you to become a better version of yourself, a more attractive version of yourself. That has combined at a crossroads with your ex-dumper self-reflecting months and months down the line. And what we see here is if and when your ex self-reflects, when they start to consider whether they've made the right choice, if and when they find out how you're doing and living your life via friends of friends, family, social media, etc., this is when they can start to consider that maybe they were hasty, maybe they made the wrong choice. If and when you start to date new people, this is when your ex-dumper can really get that feeling that they're missing out because you must be a dateable option. You must be a dateable individual if somebody else wants to date you. And this is why the moving on theory comes about. But we have to remember that you're not likely to want to date anybody new for months and months and months, if not years down the line. So you're not going to be dating somebody 2 weeks after being dumped. And this is where the misunderstanding can take place. You're not going to be able to, quote unquote, move on until so much time has passed that not only are you a better person, that somebody else wants to date you, that you feel comfortable dating, that your ex-dumper is now self-reflecting. This is how it all comes together. And that is the truth and the reason as for why an ex wants you when you move on. If you believe that this podcast has helped you, then please consider buying me a coffee. The link to do so is in the description.